I still remember the first time I truly saw the shadow that would change my life forever. A shadow that lurked on the edge of my vision in the vast, unforgiving desert of the Navajo Nation. A place where legends were not just stories, but an ever-present force that clung to the arid wind and the red, cracked earth. I was only 17 then, a restless teenager with more questions than answers, and my uncle, a man of few words and mysterious habits, had always been the subject of hushed warnings among our people. They said he carried secrets too dark to speak of, and though I admired him, there was an unsettling aura about him that I could never quite ignore. It began subtly, on a moonless night when the stars were obscured by a dusty haze and the desert was cloaked in an eerie silence. I noticed how my uncle's eyes seemed to gleam with a feral intensity as he stood at the doorway of our family's weathered hogan. That night, unable to sleep and driven by a mixture of adolescent curiosity and a deep-seated fear instilled by the old stories, I crept out into the desert, following the sound of his measured footsteps that echoed like a ritual chant against the cool, dark expanse. The air was crisp, carrying the faint aroma of sage mixed with something acrid and indefinable, and as I moved silently across the barren landscape, I recalled the ancient legends of the Skinwalker, a malevolent shapeshifter, cursed to assume the form of various creatures, or even a human, to deceive and devour the spirit of its prey. I had grown up hearing the elders recount tales of how skinwalkers prowled the night, their eyes glowing with an unholy light and their movements fluid, like shadows cast by a dying fire. I followed my uncle at a distance, careful not to be seen, my heart pounding with each cautious step along the uneven ground that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the desert itself. The moon had finally begun to break through the clouds, casting a pale glow over the rugged terrain and revealing a world that was both beautiful and perilous. In the distance, my uncle's silhouette moved with an almost predatory grace, his figure elongated by the shifting light and the undulating sand. I watched in stunned silence as he approached a secluded mesa, its flat summit rising starkly against the dark horizon, and I sensed that something in that forbidden expanse was not as it should be. Every instinct in me screamed to turn back, yet I found myself compelled to continue, drawn by a force I could neither name nor resist. As I crept closer, the atmosphere around the mesa grew charged with a palpable energy, a low hum that resonated deep within my bones, as if the earth itself was murmuring ancient secrets. The wind, now more insistent, carried with it the soft, almost imperceptible sound of chanting, a cadence that was both hypnotic and foreboding. Hiding behind a cluster of scrubby juniper, I peered out and watched as my uncle stopped at the base of a weathered rock outcrop. There, under the flickering light of a solitary lantern, he began to murmur words in a language that twisted through the air like smoke, a language I recognized only from the half-remembered warnings of our elders. In that moment, I realized that he was not alone. Shadows shifted around him, taking on the shape of animals and even human forms, their eyes glinting with an unnatural sheen. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as the realization sank in. My uncle was not merely a quiet, mysterious man. He was something else entirely, something that defied the boundaries of human nature. The scene before me unfolded with a surreal clarity. Figures emerged from the darkness, their outlines distorted by the interplay of light and shadow, moving with an otherworldly fluidity that made them seem less solid than the rock and sand. I strained my eyes, trying to discern if these shapes were real or mere tricks of the desert night, but their presence was undeniable. They were watching, waiting. My uncle raised his arms, and in a motion both graceful and horrifying, his form began to shift, as if he were shedding an old skin. The transformation was subtle at first, a twitch of a finger, the glint of an eye, but soon it became more pronounced, his human features blurring into something else. The glistening eyes, the elongated limbs, and a sinuous, almost animalistic movement that sent a jolt of terror racing through me. I realized with a sickening clarity that I was witnessing the birth of a skinwalker, a creature of ancient curses that roamed these lands with the hunger for the living. In that frozen moment, every tale of old came rushing back. The warnings of those who had seen the unseeable, the terrified whispers of elders recounting encounters with beings that were neither man nor beast. I felt my stomach churn as I watched my uncle's face contort, the human features melting away into a mask of predatory savagery. His eyes, once warm and familiar, now shone with a feral light, and his smile twisted into a semblance of something best left unspoken. The transformation was not instantaneous. It was a gradual, horrifying metamorphosis that seemed to stretch time itself. As he moved, his silhouette merged with the desert shadows, and soon I could no longer tell where he ended and the night began. I knew then that I had to flee. Yet every instinct also urged me to document this unfathomable horror, to capture on film what no mortal was meant to see. With shaking hands, I pulled out my small camcorder, the only link I had to the rational world, and began recording from my hidden vantage point. My voice, barely a whisper in the vast silence of the desert, trembled as I narrated what I saw, a silent witness to the unholy ritual unfolding before me. The camera captured flickers of movement, a gliding form that defied gravity, the subtle shift of eyes that burned with an intensity beyond mortal ken, and the shifting dance of shadows that seemed to celebrate the transformation. Every frame etched itself into my memory, a mosaic of fear and wonder that would haunt my dreams for years to come. Then, as if sensing my intrusion, the atmosphere grew even heavier. A deep, guttural sound reverberated through the night air, a sound that was not merely of this world, but seemed to emanate from the very soul of the desert. The chanting ceased abruptly, replaced by a silence so profound it seemed to suck the breath from my lungs, and in that moment, the Skinwalker turned its gaze directly toward the direction of my hidden camera. Its eyes, like burning coals in the darkness, locked onto the lens, and for a heartbeat, I felt as though it was peering into my very soul, reading the unspoken secrets of my fear. I froze, my heart pounding so fiercely I was sure it would shatter the silence, and in that paralyzing instant, the creature stepped forward, its movements deliberate and predatory. The desert around me became a blur, a shifting canvas of swirling sand and shadow, while the Skinwalker advanced slowly, each step measured, as if it were drawing me into a trap from which there was no escape. In a desperate bid to save myself, I broke from my hiding place and bolted through the rocky terrain, the sound of my ragged breathing and pounding footsteps the only counterpoint to the ominous silence behind me. I could hear the creature's pursuit, a low, relentless hum that seemed to match my every beat. As I ran, my mind a chaotic swirl of terror and disbelief. The desert, which had once seemed infinite and indifferent, now closed in around me, its familiar landmarks twisted into an alien landscape of jagged rocks and hidden crevices. I stumbled over uneven ground, my limbs heavy with exhaustion, all the while glancing back to catch glimpses of that unyielding red glow. Every time I dared to look, the Skinwalker was there, its form merging with the darkness, its eyes following me as though it were a part of the very night itself. Hours seemed to stretch into an eternity as I navigated the labyrinthine paths of the desert, the stars overhead obscured by swirling dust, and my mind reeling with the realization that the creature's relentless pursuit was not merely a physical chase, but a descent into a primordial terror that defied explanation. My thoughts turned to the ancient lore of my people, the whispered warnings, the cautionary tales of those who had encountered such beings and paid a terrible price, and I could not shake the feeling that my own destiny was now irrevocably intertwined with forces far older and darker than I had ever imagined. I found refuge behind a large boulder in a narrow canyon, hoping that the natural rock formation might shield me from prying eyes. There, in the stifling silence of the hidden alcove, I listened as the wind carried the soft murmur of chants and the faint rustle of shifting sand. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that I might have evaded the creature's notice, that the ancient curse had momentarily spared me from its inexorable grasp. But as the minutes ticked by and the silence deepened into a suffocating weight, I felt a presence that was impossible to ignore, a dark, malevolent force that seeped into my thoughts, whispering of inevitable fate and unspeakable retribution. The feeling was not one of mere fear, but a profound sense of being marked, of having my soul entwined with an ancient, relentless hunger that could not be quenched by mortal means. It was then that I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound like the rustle of silk and the whisper of ancient winds, a sound that beckoned me to step out from behind the boulder and confront the darkness. Driven by a mixture of terror and a desperate need for understanding, I emerged from my hiding place and crept forward along the canyon, every sense on high alert, my heart pounding a frenetic rhythm that seemed to echo the ancient pulse of the land itself. As I advanced, the air around me shimmered with an unearthly luminescence, and the shadows took on shapes that defied logic, fleeting images of figures in traditional regalia that faded as quickly as they appeared, as if the desert itself were recalling memories of long-forgotten rituals. I knew in that moment that the creature was more than a mere predator. It was a guardian of an ancient secret, a living embodiment of the curses that had been woven into the fabric of our history. I pressed on, my mind awash with conflicting emotions of dread and an inexplicable compulsion to learn the truth, even if that truth might shatter the very essence of my being. Suddenly, as if emerging from the depths of a nightmare, I caught sight of a figure standing at the mouth of a narrow ravine, a figure that, in the flickering light of dawn, resembled my uncle in every way, yet was shrouded in an aura of malevolence and otherworldly power. My heart skipped a beat as I realized that the legends were true. The Skinwalker was not a myth, but a living terror, and perhaps the man I had known as my uncle had succumbed to its dark allure. I watched in paralyzing horror as the figure slowly turned, its eyes meeting mine with an intensity that conveyed a silent promise of doom and despair. In that instant, the air seemed to crackle with an unseen energy, and I felt as if time itself had fractured, the boundaries between reality and the realm of ancient curses dissolving into a vortex of fear and uncertainty. I scrambled backwards, my breath coming in short, panic gasps as I fled deeper into the twisting labyrinth of the desert. The haunting glow of those predatory eyes followed me relentlessly, a reminder that I had glimpsed a truth that no human was meant to know. The world around me blurred into a chaotic montage of swirling sand, jagged rocks, and ghostly apparitions, each echoing the ancient lore of the Skinwalker. Every step I took was fraught with the knowledge that the creature's shadow was never far behind, a spectral presence that would forever haunt the corridors of my mind, whispering dark secrets and ancient curses that defied explanation. I finally reached a narrow plateau where the harsh light of the rising sun began to break through the inky darkness of the desert night. There, I collapsed, my body trembling from exhaustion and fear, as the echoes of the encounter reverberated in my ears like a mournful dirge. Hours later, as I lay shivering in the cold light of dawn, I dared to glance back at the endless expanse of desert, half expecting to see that unyielding, burning gaze tracking my every movement. But all that met my eyes was the silent, indifferent landscape, a barren sea of sand and rock, as if the ancient terror had retreated back into the shadows from whence it came. In the days and weeks that followed, I painstakingly reviewed the footage I managed to capture, each frame a fractured glimpse of a horror beyond human understanding. The images were blurred and shuddering, punctuated by fleeting moments of clarity, a flash of red eyes, the outline of a gaunt, shifting form, and a presence that seemed to blur the line between man and myth. The experience left an indelible mark on my soul, a constant, gnawing reminder that the world is vast and full of mysteries that defy our understanding, that sometimes the most terrifying legends are not merely stories told around a fire, but warnings etched in the sands of time. Even now, as I sit in the relative safety of my home far from that desolate wilderness, I cannot shake the feeling that the shadow of the Skinwalker still lingers at the edge of my vision, waiting for the night to fall so that its ancient, malevolent gaze might find me once again. And so, with a heart still pounding in terror and wonder, I leave you with this final, lingering question. Have you ever felt the bone-deep chill of an unseen presence following you through the dark, endless corridors of your life? A presence so ancient and relentless that it forces you to confront the unsettling truth that some legends are not confined to the pages of history, but live on in the shadows, forever waiting to claim another soul?